Hello, welcome back. I am honored and excited to be speaking with Anna Tavis today. She has co-written a book with Stella Lupashore, Humans at Work. We're going to be discussing that. We're going to be talking about empathy. And one of the things that I have made a commitment to everyone uh, to start off each episode for the foreseeable future is calling out what's happening in Ukraine. And speaking of empathy, empathizing with what's happening with the people over there. Please stay involved. Please, I know it's tiring. We're effectively a month into the war now. And the requirements, the needs of the people of Ukraine remain there. So again, stay involved and let's keep thinking about our fellow humans over there. And hopefully, let's pray for a resolution and peace very soon. So, with that as a staging. Anna is one of the most caring, wonderful people that I've had the pleasure of meeting over the course of my career. And so, with that, Anna, I'm going to introduce you and bring you in. And let's see. There you are. How you doing?
Hi, doing great. Thank you so much, Al. I am so pleased to be on this side of the screen because I'm a big fan of your podcasts and all of your guests, and I kind of been, empathizing with all of them as you take us through different conversations on the topic and kind of weaving in these important themes that connect us back to reality. So I'm delighted to be dialing in from New York City. Those of you who understand the landscape and the map, right behind me is New York Public Library, which is where my office is. And I can say a few words about where I am now in terms of what I do, and we'll be delighted to have the conversation, Al.
Well, let's make it happen. So, if you want to talk about, please, not only the book that you've co-authored, but you are the director of the Human Capital Programs there at NYU. You want to share a bit about that?
Yep. So, I joined NYU as a professor about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I was an executive in human capital management, mostly on the talent side, looking at talent acquisition, talent development, succession planning, the whole portfolio of talent programs in the U.S. as well as in Europe, and I was working in technology and the financial services in my previous career. But I think what's relevant, much more relevant, is when I stepped into the academic role. My mission was to really bring the relevance, the urgency of human capital management in practice into professional development. And that's where I am. I am directing a program in human capital analytics and technology. It's one of the programs in our portfolio as we are continuing to grow. And as we are seeing here on the screen, this particular program we deliberately accredited as a STEM program, which allows a lot of benefits, and designed it around STEM skills. But at the same time, we were also thinking really hard about how to make the relevant connection to people. I'm sure that you, Al, yourself, and a lot of people in our audience think about analytics as something horizontal that kind of is agnostic to the disciplines. And we are often asked, why should I bother with people analytics? I'm just going to take an analytics or technology qualification, and I will be able to apply it in every vertical, in every domain in the business. And we really looked into it, and I'll be very interested in your point of view on this, and decided that no, indeed, we need to have human expertise to be able to apply the data and technology for good, exactly as the title of your podcast. There are lots of interesting and I think very critical and pivotal skill sets that intersect with technology and analytics that allow for this particular qualification to be unique on the market.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, we hear from the businesses, the business leaders that, bringing a data scientist into HR and asking them to do the analytics doesn't really work that well, because it is a very specific profession that we're all in. And I'd
Well,
like to explore that.
I certainly celebrate what you're saying and the fact that you have taken the time and effort, and I know you've been at this for a number of years to not only get this program launched, but to your point, make it a STEM program so it attracts the not only the benefits, but the people who can think of this not as an ancillary, okay, what am I doing this for? But actually it's going to be fundamental and help their employability downstream. And thankfully, our discipline is one of, we have a gross undersupply of talent to do the work that's required in the world. So the demand for your program is certainly there. So again, I celebrate you and what you all are doing over there. The idea that HR analytics, people analytics is a unique discipline. You asked me what I thought. Absolutely, yes. Not only is the data unique because we're taking it from different systems across the employee life cycle and increasingly disparate data from other disciplines. It is the case that we're affecting people's lives. I mean, fundamentally, with the insight, we could, any analyst, it has to acknowledge the level of responsibility that they have when they're analyzing data around behavior, around their thoughts and feelings, and ideas. So with that as a staging, empathy is something that we are, hearing a lot in the world today. I love in the chapter that you draw a distinction between what's happening at Amazon and Microsoft. You have a framework by which to think about it. So can you explain it, particularly in your, the more I learn about your book, Humans at Work, and the fact that the title is what it is, and I just get all the more excited because it's a narrative that needs to be heard and understood, because analytics, empathy, they're actually very close together. And I don't think many have perceived that that connective tissue, if you will. So if you would, what is empathy to you in relation to the program there at NYU and your own experience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Al. I pulled that particular chapter from the book that, in general, is about reverting back to humans with all of the tools and technologies that we have. And as you can see here on the image, first of all, I acknowledge it just happened that our book is in exact colors of the Ukrainian flag. And I have the reference to it here in the corner. It's the yellow jacket with the blue text. And empathy has surfaced front and center during the pandemic, when we suddenly had to confront at a global scale with the fact that humans are actually precious and fragile, and kind of made that pivot at scale for the first time, from being exclusively transactionally oriented in our business, saying this is business, this is human, let's just move on, to a very different posture when it came to leadership. And here I am profiling 3 leaders who are obviously front and center in different domains. But I think the 3 very powerful examples that demonstrate the importance of what seems to be such an intangible quality that we shied away from for quite a number of years in their specific domains. As you can see, obviously, very current President Zelensky, a reminder. I mean, we really had to dig back to World War II and the references to Churchill to even come up with an equivalent political analog of what we are seeing playing out in front of our eyes, of how this particular courageous and empathetic leadership plays out. So I think he's definitely a historic figure, and we are watching almost in disbelief because we thought we moved away from these heroic leaders of the past, right? So that's on in the political domain, as well as in the context of the pandemic. I reference Jacinda Ardern, the president, or the prime minister of New Zealand, who also stepped up, in her empathetic posture, and as a result, her nation fared very, very well compared to the rest of us in the pandemic because she acted from the human-centered perspective in how she aligned policies, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, which I think is closer to what we are all in the business of doing, is being on the inside of organizations, looking at people at work, as I compare the philosophies of management, of leadership, of development, of Amazon and Microsoft, and even not to take it to Amazon, but looking at the history of Amazon. I mean, Satya Nadella stepped in, growing from the inside of that organization, and brought a phenomenal, empathy to how he manages his vast and very technical organization, in contrast to the leaders that preceded him. So that brings us to the point of, what is going forward going to be really important for us in terms of successfully managing people, organizations, and societies at large. And I would argue, as we do in the chapter, that empathetic and the whole kind of affective side of human beings, even though we didn't focus on it from the data perspective, is actually, I would say, a gold mine for information. We just need to find tools to tap into that informational truth, like the richness of that information that we just didn't have the tools to access. That's why we dismissed it, assuming that we just need to focus on the rational side. Again, underestimating the importance of a much broader and much richer information space that humans operate in. And to my point on the slides, I have a quote there, Al, if we could show it, that I think is very powerful, right? I think this is really capturing the trajectory of where we're going. And it's important for us as analytics leaders also to be thinking about how we are going to transition, what kinds of tools, what kinds of approaches, models, as well as mental, mindsets that we're going to bring in to the organizations, which will be led not just with the brain, but also with the heart. Mm-hmm. And I think that these two cataclysmic world events got us closer to that point of where we are making a pivot in that direction. And we're looking at, and also from the technology and tool perspective, we are much more advanced now that we can start tiptoeing in that direction. We are very early on, but we have the science and we have the tools to really try to excavate that very valuable information for us. And that's where, again, I think the role of people analytics that will be able to combine the effective and cognitive side of human decision making, of humans at work, is going to be really critical, and is going to be, and organizations that are going to figure out how to do it right are going to be leading in the market.
I celebrate what you're sharing, and I agree that they're going to not only lead in the market economically, but they're going to win in competing for talent. There's a lot of people who are excited to be working at Microsoft these days because of the culture. And there are some tech companies here in the Bay Area, and there's a recent story which I'm not at liberty to share, but hey, it's a great job, great money, but I'm not going to go there because the culture isn't empathetic. It is all about business results. It has kind of this very macho, hey, just get stuff done, and it diminishes the reality that we are human beings, that we have constraints, that we have feelings, that we have, other priorities in our life. And if you honor those priorities in some organizations, then it's okay, you're not focused enough, you're not committed enough. And I remember going back, 20 years, and it's still a construct that's out there, is discretionary effort. Well, if you're really engaged, if you're doing, if you're really committed to the organization, then you're going to take your spare time, in other words, and you're going to devote it to your work. Sounds good on paper, but what are you trading off? What are the sacrifices that you're making in terms of your health, your personal relationships, and so forth? So going back to what you're saying about the information, where do you think we're going in capturing, people's feelings around what their work experience would be like? And if we can identify, some of the boundaries and some of the aspirations of people, theoretically, we can start, for lack of a better term, right-sizing work, not only at an individual level, but in mass at an organizational level. So your thoughts about how to apply empathy, throughout an organization or at scale?
This is a really, really interesting conversation, and you can approach it from many different angles. One of course, is the breakthroughs in neuroscience and the research that we, again, in the analytics field also have to pay attention to. Again, it's getting at data, different kinds of data with different kinds of tools, but in the long run, it all blends together. It all merges into this pursuit of understanding how to get to productivity, how to get to happiness, how to make people flourish, right? Mm-hmm. So here's something that became so clear to everyone when we were pushed back to work from our homes and at scale, again, globally. Number one is understanding about the importance of boundaries, boundaries between work and non-work, right? And I do write about it in the book about, for example, work and leisure. The understanding the relationship between work and leisure is absolutely critical. In fact, so there's no good work without good leisure. That is such an important discovery that we've found out. I mean, everyone is aware on this call, I'm sure, that when we first got the marching orders to stay at home, et cetera, productivity shoot through the roof. Productivity was something that we didn't anticipate. People were, what we didn't know at that time is people were actually burning themselves out. And the consequences of that is, mental illness, the rise in addictions and suicides and loneliness as a real social disease, and lots of other unintended consequences. So, and part of it was people did stop working a lot more, but what they lost is that leisure part to it, the separating out the boundaries that existed before. So, and I actually, when I started researching it, and I am also kind of a humanitarian. I love history. I like looking back at where did the initial models come from, and I looked at the Stoics. That the whole Stoic philosophy. What fascinated me about the Stoics was that the Silicon Valley apparently adopted the Stoics as their leading philosophy. There's been so many followers of some of the most prominent Stoics. So I looked at what they had to say about the leisure and work, and also kind of understanding that the Stoic way of working, which we all assumed was work, was not at all that it was actually a balance between leisure and work. And then the research that came out on the importance of sleep, for example, all the way to then the whole technology developing around wellness and companies providing those services to the employees so that they understand that they need to take a certain number of hours in bed. So, the question obviously, so as work moved into homes, then we suddenly realized that we need to set our own boundaries. And for a lot of people, they didn't exist. And that was a new skill set. So those boundaries needed to be recovered or established. And guess what? The tools started to pop up because technology is now shadowing all of our needs. And on top of that, and it's like, as circular innovation here. On top of that, we started to receive all the data that's coming out about people's habits, about sleep cycles, etc. And that data was fed back into the efficiencies of tools, companies making decisions about work cycles, about even the policies around work from home, working in the office, etc. So we kind of went through this whole discovery phase of the pandemic and learned a lot about the effectiveness of work by breaking through those boundaries, putting the right tools to measure what actually happens, and running this huge experiment that produced a tremendous amount of data and that we now can again harvest and put back into improving our well-being on the job, in the workplace, and generally in life. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
yeah, it makes beautiful sense. And we're at this point in our history, and I'm not only talking about overarching history, but in business history. I go back 12 plus years, book Firms of Endearment, conscious capitalism, and it showed that organizations that applied stakeholder relationship management, looking out for the well-being of their worker, actually outperformed financially their peer groups. You also have the case, to your point, where we have organizations that even today are winning the war for talent in the scarce talent market in many job families because they have a more humane approach to the employee experience or their culture. So the evidence is out there. However, we still have a lot of legacy thinking. We have this idea of defining what it is to be a leader, still being that often man in front of a room commanding the attention of a large audience, when in fact you look at Jim Collins' Even Good to Great. Now that's 20 years ago, plus, talk about level 5 leadership, where it's beyond yourself. So there's all this evidence and increasingly from different disciplines that show that, hey, we have to honor who we are. And this is actually going to impact how we look at productivity. Productivity is output over time in its essence, and robots they don't need sleep. They don't need all that, but we are, human beings. So honoring those constraints, I think, is still, to your point, we have runway there. And that actually might be a good segue into this depiction, as we start to wrap.
Yeah. So I think given the initial quote and what we discussed about rediscovering, reconnecting with our humanity, and also honoring the tools that we now have access to, we actually are moving toward a much more empathetic workplace. And to help us, the challenge about empathy before was it was considered to be an individual trait. People were, allegedly born with that or not, and it was not scalable. So what technology is allowing us to do now is not only imitate life, but also retrain us on the skills. And that's where I see the irony and also fascination with technology. Retrain these skills, give us back that important feedback and information that gives us then the permission to do what we naturally would have done if it wasn't for all of the ideological noise that was created at the Industrial Revolution and going forward. So I think now we are looking the frontiers even of AI, the frontiers of technology. And here in the chapter I do talk about how the whole kind of evolution of empathy occurred. Very recent terminology, recent understanding started out with aesthetics in Germany and went through various schools of psychology, primarily psychoanalysis in German universities. Then later in the last century, we discovered behavioral economics. That was kind of splitting off from neoclassic economics and Milton Friedman, which was moving in the opposite direction. Then obviously our friends in marketing and product design, and Steve Jobs obviously was the primary sort of leader and guru in that space, product design and marketing. So kind of in the consumer space, but now we are reintegrating it back into the workplace. We always follow marketing, but I think not for much too longer. This century is going to be about people at work. We were in a consumer world where a lot of innovation happened. Now we're going to reclaim those tools, both analytics and technology, and bring this into a much more complex space. And here I'm showing some of the tools. Those of you who are familiar with design thinking, et cetera, there are more and more technologies and tools and the data that are emerging about the importance of all of these different senses that we are blessed with and should be using as sources of tremendous information. And then we're going to reconnect and blend with technological tools to be able to scale empathy that is so needed. And just one example here, Al, where I think there's most progress, and we reflected in the chapter, is done in caring for the elderly. And looking at these tools, because we are facing an aging population. As we know, there are huge shortages in healthcare and home care and assisted living and different types of care for the elderly. And some of the experiments that are done with the computational empathy and robots that are built to specifically care for the elderly or being the companions for the elderly are absolutely mind-blowing. And we are learning a lot about humanity and humans' ability to personalize those robots and bond them with them and give them names and care for the robots, etc. These experiments are happening at scale. And here I'm just giving effective computing some of the directions in where the breakthroughs in artificial intelligence are happening right now as it applies to caring for the humans. Is this both in the predictive space, predicting the emotional state where people are, or predicting people's reactions to a different set of stimuli. So this is where the experiment is now happening across the board in different areas in which humans are interacting at the moment with the humans, but where the robots can step in, those emotionally relatable robots, and provide a tremendous amount of care and support for people who oftentimes find themselves isolated. And there's one line of conversation, Al, that I want to flag to people. It's also in the book, is about how our own relationship with these types of robots, technologies is changing. The conversations are now, I have a whole chapter that talks about comparisons with animal rights. how we trace the history, because animals up until very recently were not considered to be kind of emotionally irrelevant to humans, right?
Mhm.
And how this whole philosophy, how this whole mindset evolved, and it wasn't easy. And how the scientists who advocated for the animals and animal rights, and now we are beginning to empathize and stronger protect animals. For example, even with the Ukraine, I had people reaching out to me saying, can we adopt some of the animals that are being neglected right now and left behind? What is being done for the animals?
Mhm.
So the question, I'm bringing that up because I think there will be some serious ethical questions asked about technology. How the humans should these empathetic machines be also given some rights? Because what they found out, that, for example, if people start bonding with the robots, for example, they can't commit violent acts to
Mm.
those machines, because they start making them, projecting their own personal connections, and emotionally connect with those. And therefore the big conversation is, should the emotionally equipped machines, robots, be given a right to life, to
Wow.
protection of some sort? It's a
Wow.
very interesting, in that context, just to throw in something, in that instant, the discussion around, should these machines be looking like humans? Because the more like humans they look, the more they become identical to various types of companions, et cetera, et cetera. And the question of their rights starts to come up. But,
Wow.
pushing you all the way to that frontier, it's a very interesting conversation.
Oh, it's a huge, I mean, it's like it takes, do you like your Apple Watch to a whole new level? But it's like when people don't have it, it's like you can see that they're, I, I'm not my whole self right now, and it's kind of both scary, but you're obviously getting to that, and also takes, same relationship with your vehicle. It's like it enables you as a human being to do
And
more,
sometimes
and yeah,
sometimes people give names to their tools. I mean,
yeah,
especially children. You know,
wow.
it's a question, obviously, very very early, but that's what we do on this podcast, on this in this discussion, is pointing out in a direction which at this point we might not be even thinking about, but it's coming much sooner than we think it is.
Well, and I look forward to reading the whole book in its entirety once able to get it in hand. But folks can pre-order it now. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it's coming in a couple of weeks. Yes.
All right. Well, excited for you and Stella. And again, I want to emphasize, thanks for being who you are. Thanks for your voice. Thanks for sharing it with me and our audience. So you be well. And how can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
Please join me on LinkedIn. If you're interested in the programs, connect with me through messages on LinkedIn. That's the best. I do have a Twitter account, but that's mostly for following people. I think most of us, our community, is on LinkedIn. And don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much, Elle.
All right. Thanks, Anna. You be well. And again, super appreciate you. All right.
Thank
Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.